Next, the members of the Fourth Estate interview Senator Taft on Meet the Press. This is WNBT New York, Channel 4.
Our guest of the afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, will be Senator Robert A. Taft of Ohio, who started Friday what may well be one of the most historic debates of our time. And now, ladies and gentlemen, Meet the Press. Ready for today's unrehearsed, spontaneous press conference are four of America's top reporters. Please remember that their questions do not necessarily reveal their point of view. It's their way of getting a story for you. Now meet Mr. James Reston of the New York Times, Mr. Lawrence Spivak of Mercury Publications, a regular member of the Meet the Press panel, Mr. Marshall McNeil of Scripps Howard's newspapers, Mr. Ned Brooks, NBC commentator on national affairs. Finally, Miss Martha Roundtree, moderator of Meet the Press.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, members of the press panel, and Senator Taft. And now, who has the first question for the senator? Mr. Spivak.
Senator, your enemies say that in spite of all your disclaimers, you're an isolationist at heart. Are you?
Well, I wouldn't think so, would you? I mean, after all, perhaps two of the cardinal principles that I spoke of Friday was the general idea of setting up a control of the sea and air throughout the entire world and maintaining that control as the central feature of a bastion of free nations. That certainly isn't isolationism. Second place, I've always been in favor of letting Russia know definitely that if they attack Western Europe, they'll find us in that war. That certainly is not isolationism. No, this isolationist thing has come to be just a name-calling proposition, something that's thrown against people who happen to disagree with the administration's foreign policy in any respect. But it means nothing today.
Senator, your opponents also say that your speech will undermine Eisenhower's mission and interfere with his formation of the European army. What have you to say to that?
Oh, no, I don't think so. I didn't shut out any possibility of approving agreements that were made. My point was that the agreement must be submitted to Congress, that the President and Eisenhower should not commit this nation without congressional approval, and I think the people over there ought to know. Certainly that isn't going to deter them from making an agreement if they're inclined to make an agreement.
You don't think that you're saying to Europe that they better go slow, that they can't depend upon us, and suggesting to them that it might be wise for them to be neutral?
I didn't say that. What I said was that
I didn't say you said that. I said
I thought our commitment of troops, of land troops, should not be so complete, should not be the center of our strategy, and we should not be called upon to provide such a large proportion of troops that we had the chief burden of this defense.
Well, Senator, did you not actually oppose the appointment of Eisenhower? Eisenhower's accepting the responsibility of the supreme command of the North Atlantic nations.
Yes, I did. But of course, as I understand General Eisenhower's position today, he has not accepted this proposition. He is going to Europe to determine whether it's practical, whether the kind of things that these different nations will agree to is something that is within the effective means of carrying out the Atlantic Pact as he sees it.
But
I don't understand that he has yet committed himself to undertake the commander-in-chiefship of an international army until he has made this survey and returned to this country a month from now to report and consult with the President.
Well, that was precisely my point, however, that on the eve of his departure for Europe, you made a public address, a prominent address in the Senate, in which you opposed the whole idea of his having gone over there, taking that, of an American taking that command.
No, I referred to his going over and hoped that he would make a complete survey of the situation. I am opposed that when this plan is worked out, that the commander-in-chief should be an American. I think it means that they will regard us as being primarily responsible for the Army. They will draw upon us, therefore, for more and more troops. We have to make it a success. It's our project. I think it's a mistake for an American to be the commander-in-chief.
Would you do it
if this agreement is finally set up? I certainly have no objection to General Eisenhower going over and negotiating an agreement, providing it's understood that agreement is to be submitted for consideration by Congress.
Well, would you do it the other way around? Would you prefer to put our troops under a foreign commander?
Yes.
You would?
Oh, yes.
Why? Why would you do that?
Because I don't think this project is primarily our project. It seems to me that our chief strategy is control of the sea and air throughout the world. The defense of Europe is primarily the concern of the European nations. I'm most willing to help them in that operation. But I certainly do not want to get to the position we are in Korea, where we provide 90% of the force that is fighting the Russians on the continent of Asia. Today, 90% in the continent of Europe in the case of the Atlantic Pact agreement.
Mr. McNeil.
Senator, prior to your Friday speech, you've been quoted as saying that you have no great faith in our top military leaders. Does that include Eisenhower?
No, I think I used the word Pentagon, whatever that significance may be.
Well?
My general statement was just a statement made in a speech in Cincinnati at the Masonic Lunch Club there, that the people had lost confidence in the government because at one moment they seemed to be stricken with panic, and the next moment they're full of complete assurance. And that was true of the Pentagon just as much as it was of any other part of the government.
Well,
and at one time, we were to be wiped out in Korea overnight. There was no chance, practically, of rescuing any boys. And then a month later, we're going to stay there forever, apparently, as far as we can get from the general impression. It's easy to stay there. I think the truth is somewhere between. And I lack confidence in any leadership that, I say, wavers between panic and complete security.
What validity will you give to Eisenhower's report when he returns?
Oh, I think I have the greatest respect for General Eisenhower. Not only his military ability to fight a war, but also in his political judgment. I think he has excellent political judgment, but he hasn't been part of the Army or part of the Pentagon up to this time. I think he would be the first to repudiate any responsibility for the conduct of the Korean War.
Well, speaking of the military thing, since you dealt with military matters, and so many of them in your speech on Friday, I've heard some of your critics wonder whether your military advisors on that speech might not be the same as those that advised Senator Bora. You remember he said just before World War II there'd be no such war. Could they be the same?
No, no, I don't think they're the same. My military advisors are probably the same as yours. You read the advice from military critics in the newspapers every day. That's my best source of information. I remember on Formosa, the president said that he didn't know I was a military critic. But of course it was only 2 months later that General MacArthur said that Formosa was a very key to our military position in the Pacific. I think that you can form broad conclusions on military policy, not, of course, on tactics. But
there's one other matter about that speech having to do with the military side that interested me. You said, in effect, that a large army of 3.5 million Americans is larger than is needed in Europe, as I understood you to say.
No, not needed in Europe. I said that I thought that if we were going to maintain the state of military preparedness for any considerable length of time, we ought not to try to support more than 3 million men under arms continuously for a period of 4 or 5 years.
How did you arrive at that figure, sir?
From the apparent cost of the proposition as presented to the committees, it seems that might be done with perhaps the cost of $40 billion. If the armed services cost $40 billion, I think we can perhaps balance our budget. If we get it up to 80 or 100, I think we face a deficit of 20, 25 billion a year, and I just don't think you can prevent further depreciation of the dollar. I think you take away manpower from the necessary productive facilities that you need. It seems to me that from that standpoint, it's very unwise to do it unless you have to.
Well,
now, I feel myself that an army, that's about an army of 1.5 million, land army, about 1.5 million in sea and air, with which I think you can get a bang-up sea and air control. 1.5 million land army would enable us to send substantial troops to Europe, but it wouldn't enable us to be the whole backbone of a European army.
One other military thing bothers me, sir. Do you have any fear that if we don't keep our treaty obligations in Europe,